Let's talk for a minute about what a Renderworks camera actually is. In real life, you can stand in front of a building with your camera and point the camera at the building and then take a picture. And you can do something similar in Renderworks using the camera tool. You click on the tool to select a camera, place it in the scene, and then point it at the object that you're interested in showing. Now, in reality, you can use many Renderworks cameras in a scene and then have each one showing a different view of the object. And that would be similar to basically walking around a building with your camera and taking pictures from different spots. In this case, you will put individual camera objects in each of those spots. In this exercise, we will use two Renderworks cameras to generate the views that will render during the tutorial. One camera will show an overall view of the front of the building, and the other camera will display the building at an angle and from a closer distance. Now, where do we put the cameras? In this file, we'll place the cameras in the layer Site with Buildings, which is currently the active layer and which contains all the objects in the scene, buildings, background items, etc. And this is where we'll place the cameras. By the way, the other layer is called Entourage Locations, and it's there only as a kind of a map to show the spots where we will place the items prepared during this tutorial. It's really there as a convenience. You don't necessarily need to create such a layer when you prepare your own renderings. We just prepared it for this exercise, basically. So let's go ahead and place the cameras. First, let's zoom in to the area where the cameras will be located, and we can see that the two camera locations are marked. Let's place the first camera. In the visualization toolset, select the Renderworks Camera tool, and then click once in the center of the marker called Camera 1 and drag the cursor in the direction of the marker's arrow to set a direction, and finally click again to complete the action. By the way, the Object Properties dialog box may appear the first time you place a camera in a file, especially if it's a new file, and so if it does appear, just click OK for now. So now that we've placed the camera, how do we see what the camera sees? We're in top plan view and we see the camera object, but how can we actually observe the image that the camera produces? So the camera is still selected. Let's go to the Object Info palette under the Shape tab, click on the Display Camera View button right here, and the scene will immediately switch to a perspective view exactly as seen by the camera. Now the problem is that we zoomed in earlier, so the perspective view might be off to one side, and if you cannot see the perspective view, just click on the Fit to Page Area button up in the view bar, and this will center the view right away. Now we have the camera in place and we're looking at the perspective view, but let's make an adjustment to the camera. Let's adjust the camera's height. In the Object Info palette, click on the Fine Tune Camera View button, and the Perspective View Controls dialog box will open. And the first slider at the top of the dialog box is the camera height control. So you can change the camera height either by moving the slider from side to side or by entering a number in the data field. So let's enter a number in the data field, 1830 millimeters, 1830 millimeters. Now the camera is at the height that we want, but it is tilting down a little bit because although the camera is at the height that we want, it's pointing to a lower height. It's actually pointing to a target that's set at a lower height. And you can see this in the dialog box right beneath. So to correct this, let's go to the Look to Height slider, and in the white data box right next to it, enter the same height that we entered before, 1830 millimeters, and then click OK. And now the camera's height and the direction in which it looks are the same, so we know that the camera's view is perfectly horizontal. By the way, the Perspective View Controls dialog box contains a large number of camera controls, and these allow you to modify the camera's settings with very fine measurements. So play with some of these. You can either enter dimensions or move the sliders, and you can immediately see what changing these settings actually does. Okay, we have the image on the screen now, but you might find that image to be a little bit too small. To fix this, go to the Object Info palette and then to the Crop Frame Scale % data box and enter 200. Basically, we're doubling the size of the image on the screen. Now notice that the image still doesn't reflect the new crop frame size, And for that, we'll need to update the view. So still in the Object Info palette, click on the Display Camera View button, and the image on the drawing will respond right away. One more item before we place the second camera. Notice that there's a frame around the perspective view. That's this thin line. And this frame represents the boundaries of the image generated by the camera, and the size and proportion of the frame can be controlled via the Perspective View Controls dialog box, which, as I'm sure you remember, we can access by pressing the Fine-Tune Camera button in the Object Info palette. Now, this frame is called a crop frame, and it is useful when preparing images for a presentation because you can see and you can work with the outer frame of the image. You can change the width and the height and the aspect ratio and so forth. But if you are in the process of developing a model rather than a final presentation, it's often better to not have a frame around the image, and this way you can work more freely and see more of the model as it's rotated and moved around the screen. So to remove the crop frame, go to View, Perspective, Cropped, and clicking on the word cropped will toggle the crop frame on and off. You may notice that a number of operations behave differently with the crop frame present or removed. So for example, with a crop frame removed, using the pan tool will change the viewpoint shown on the screen, like this. But you can always restore the original camera view by switching to Top Plan View and toggling the perspective crop back on. So now double-clicking on the camera will restore the camera's view. There are a number of other ways of doing this, and we'll discuss those in a few minutes. And now we'll place the second camera. So first, switch to Top Plan View and zoom in again to the area we showed earlier. We'll see the location of the marker called Camera 2. And in the Visualization palette, select the Renderworks Camera tool, and then click to place a new camera in the center of the Camera 2 marker. Drag, and then click again to finish, just as we discussed earlier. Now we have both cameras placed in the scene, and how can we store and then retrieve the views that these cameras generate? Vectorworks actually provides a number of different ways to do this. First, you can double-click directly on a camera object, and again, as before, if necessary, click on the Fit to Page area button up in the view bar, and we'll center the view so we can see it. That's one way. The second way is to find the camera in the Visualization palette under the Cameras tab, and then just double-click on it to see the camera's view. That's basically very similar to the previous method, but using the Visualization palette. And now there's a third way. Once you have the camera's view on the screen, you can save it as a saved view and then retrieve it later. So to do this, click on the Saved Views drop-down box and drag the cursor to Saved View. And a dialog box opens up, the Save View dialog box. And then you can basically give the view a name in the dialog box, click OK, and now you've saved the view. So to retrieve this view in the future, just go back to the Save Views drop-down box and then select the view that you just saved. You can also create a sheet layer viewport that shows the camera's view. With the camera's view on the screen, go to View, Create Viewport, and you'll be asked if you want to link the camera to the viewport. We will discuss this in a sec, but for now, just say no. The Create Viewport dialog box is now open. You can see that. And you can complete making all the desired adjustments, such as create on layer and so forth, and then click OK. And now you've created the viewport, and the viewport shows the camera's view. If you go back to the design layer now, and you change the camera's position or settings, the viewport that you just created will not change. It will retain its original view. You can go back, change the camera's position, move it to a completely other location in the drawing, but when you go back to this viewport, the viewport will not have changed along with the camera, because after you've created the viewport is no longer connected or linked to the camera. If you want to link a viewport to a camera, you can create exactly that kind of a viewport, one that has a camera linked to it directly. So let's go back to the design layer containing the camera view and create a viewport. And this time, when you're asked if you want to link the camera to the viewport, click Yes. And now the camera object in this case will basically become part of the viewport that you're creating. And to change the camera settings, the only way to do that is to edit the viewport in the sheet layer first. So double click on the viewport, and in the dialog box that opens, click on camera. And as soon as you've clicked on camera, you can go to the object info palette and change the camera settings just as we did before. And then click on the return to viewport button to complete this operation. Now notice the return to viewport button is on the upper right hand side, and it might be covered by some palettes, so make sure that you have it visible so you can click on it. There are some advantages to having the camera linked to the viewport. In this case, the camera will always be linked to the viewport, so you can control the camera directly from the viewport instead of going back to the design layer, making changes, or accessing the camera via the visualization palette, making changes there, and then creating a new viewport. So this shortcuts that operation. But it's important to know that the camera object itself will disappear from view in the design layer once it's linked to a viewport. So you will only be able to modify the settings by editing the viewport itself. If you go back to the design layer, you won't be able to see the camera there, and you won't be able to tell where it is. So that's the other side. If you want to see the camera always in a top plan view, then don't link the camera to a viewport. Just make a new viewport every time you change the camera settings. But if you would like to have it linked because of the advantages it provides, being able to control everything from the viewport, then just be aware that you will no longer see the camera in the plan. So now we're done placing the cameras in the scene, and let's just finish up something before moving on to the next task. Let's make the entourage locations layer invisible. We'll just change the layer options, and this way you can be sure that the information on that layer will not appear in the final renderings.